Well, hello to everyone. I just got back from summer camp. I think we have a few people in this room that were there. Any hands? Anybody? Yeah, a couple. Yeah, so it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Very, very intense, very idealistic, and cooperative weather for the most part. And over 100 campers were there from everywhere, and they just had a terrific time, and I thought it was impeccably organized. It was just a beautiful activity. So for over a week, we were all together and kept ourselves quite busy. So I came home to rest. So anyway. Once upon a time, there was a boy that came home from Sabbath school with a tale of Moses and the Red Sea. His mom had asked, well, what did you learn? He hesitated, and then he said, well, when the Israelites got to the Red Sea, then Pharaoh came with all of his tanks and his planes and fought against them. And his mom looked at him and says, do you expect me to believe that? And he said, no, Mom, but if I told you what really happened at the Red Sea, you wouldn't believe me. Christ raised an interesting question when he was on the earth. He asked, when he returns, would there be faith on the earth? I used to think when I heard that scripture read that basically that was in a negative context, that who knows, maybe there just wouldn't be any faith at the end because life would become so secular. And yet, it doesn't have to be a negative view, because when Christ returns, there definitely will be faith. It says in Matthew 16 and verse 18 that the gates of the grave will not triumph over the existence of God's church. It will always exist. If we were to turn over to the Olivet prophecy in Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2, it says, except those days be shortened, no flesh will be saved alive, but for the elect's sake. That indicates there will be faith at the end of the age, end of what we have termed as the time of the end. That when Christ returns, there will be faith on this earth. Now, faith may be limited. It's not something that most people really have a working relationship with God. But certainly we can be among those that do that. Those that among us being blessed to be saints with a relationship with God. And again, God's church will always exist. The question I want to raise today is that will we be faithful to endure and to spiritually grow to meet Christ at his return? We should anticipate that in a very positive expectation. And it says over in Matthew 24 and verse 13, and I will turn to that because that is ties right into this. Matthew 24 and verse 13. It says, he that endures to the end shall be saved. The best way to endure to the end is to be able to have the faith that God wants us to have. And that's what I'd like to talk about, is the development of confidence, the development of faith in God and what he's doing and what he allows and where he's taking this church. We don't know everything that God knows. And sometimes the journey that we have will take different twists and turns. But God is well aware of everything, and he works things to his own aims, and he is definitely interested in helping us to get there. There are three aspects that I want to cover today that involve faith building. Number one, we need to remember the divine intervention of God's blessings on his people. That's number one. Remembering divine intervention. Number two, having a profound respect for godly authority. That is in rare form and a rare commodity on this earth, but having a profound respect for God's authority. And thirdly, understanding and thwarting Satan's plan for us. We know that God has plans for us, so does Satan. We don't typically think about that, but I'd like to address that as part of the sermon. So very quickly again, number one is remembering the divine intervention of God's blessing on his people. Secondly, having a profound respect for godly authority. Thirdly, understanding and thwarting Satan's plan for us. We can expand our appreciation for God and his divine power by reviewing through the Bible major events, such as the crossing of the Red Sea. And it's inspiring when you hear about that or other things that have happened historically. It's inspiring to know that so much can be proven, even now, looking back, that we can look back at some of the amazing things like Noah's Ark and see how that really could have happened. If you go to Williamsburg, Kentucky, you can see the replica of Noah's Ark. And it took Noah some say 40, some say 120 years to build the ark. With modern technology, modern machinery, and different towers and cranes, it took mankind just a few years ago 2 whole years to build that boat. But when we see what can be done, it should strengthen our faith. It should encourage us when we read stories in the Bible, such as in Judges chapter 7. We can learn when we study a subject like this that we were never expected to be on our own, that God wants to be our silent partner. He wants to be involved with us, steer us. He's very jealous for us. He loves us. He wants us to make the right choices in life. And I know that you all know that, so we can build on that foundation here. In Judges chapter 7, we read about Gideon, and I'm sure familiar with the story that unfolded. But in Judges 7, verses 1 through 7. And this says, Then Gideon and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side, very, very close by. Verse 2. And the Lord said to Gideon, The people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, By my own hand, we have saved ourselves. That would be ridiculous. It certainly wouldn't be true. And yet it's an important concept that God can win with many or with few. He can inspire one person to make an enormous difference, like Elijah on the Mount Carmel, standing up to 450 prophets of Baal. On the other hand, he might take a small army and magnify what they do. 5 could chase 100, and 100 could chase 1,000. So in verse 3, Now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, Whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 people returned, and 10,000 remained. The 10,000 could have said, Wait a minute. We weren't a big army before. We're outmanned, we're outgunned, we're outmaneuvered. We have no military experience. We've never been in something like this before. We're not militarily minded. We're in trouble. They could have thought that, but perhaps things were unfolding so quickly they didn't know what to think. Verse 3 of verse 4. The Lord then said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be that those that I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same will go. This one will not go, then the same doesn't. He brought them down to the water. Verse 5, and the Lord said to Gideon, Everyone who laps from the water with the tongue, as a dog does, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, he who gets down his knees to drink, the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300. The others got down and on their knees to drink. The distinction was the ones that had the most courage would scoop up a little water and keep their eye on the horizon looking for the enemy. So God said, you go with those 300. In verse 7, the Lord said to Gideon, By the 300 men who outlapped, I will save you, and I will deliver the Midianites into your hand, and let all the other people go. That is supreme faith, isn't it? Where you're part of a small group that defies all odds and comes out as victorious. Let's go over to Judges. Judges chapter 10. Joshua, that's right. Joshua chapter 10. And read about Joshua's long day. Here again, you have a handful of Israelites that are spiritually enlightened, that want to obey God, and they're willing to do that against all odds. What was it that God said constantly to Joshua when he took Moses' place? Be strong and of good courage. Yes. And so it is that carried the day. In Joshua chapter 10, and verse 6, the men of Gideon sent to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, saying, do not forsake your servants. They were in an alliance with the Israelites. Come up quickly to save us and help us, for the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us. Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people of war. And verse 8, the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, even though they're numerous. I have delivered them into your hand. God many times will identify a person or an object or a place or a battle as if it already is a done deal. And that's the way God looked at it. He says, I've already delivered them, Joshua, into your hand. Not a man shall stand before you. Verse 9, therefore Joshua came with them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal, the element of surprise. And so the Lord routed them before Israel, killed them with a great slaughter, and chased them down to Beth-horon as far as Makkedah. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were in descent, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven and obviously killed many people. And notice the end of verse 11. There were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. That's what happens when God is our senior partner. That's what happens, and when we see evidence of that in times gone past or in the times in which we live, we can have more faith. It should build our faith. We should be excited about it. And so we are remembering the divine intervention of God's blessings on his people. There would be times when Mr. Herbert Armstrong would come back from a long trip, visiting 10 or 15 countries, and he would come back, and one of his good buddies, Floyd Lochner, would walk with him for exercise. And he had just come back from the Philippines, and Dr. Lochner said, well, sir, it's a privilege to be with you, and if you want, we can walk around the campus. And Mr. Armstrong said, I'm thinking of giving a message. I'm not sure what it should be about. And Dr. Lochner says, you know what? I like it when you reminisce. You haven't reminisced for a number of years. And by that he meant to think of some of the divine interventions that happened in modern day that people would be familiar with. And to me, when you consider the divine intervention of God's people, you also have to include the fact that, amazingly, there have been interventions in our lifetime. They're so encouraging and inspiring. When United first started, there was a great desire to at least do something in the work. And we had limited money. We were just getting started. And the people in Britain said, well, we've scraped together enough money that we can run a Reader's Digest ad. We can't cover the entire British Isles, but we can take one of the 10 sections that Reader Digest handles, and we can run an ad there and advertise some of our newly published booklets. And lo and behold, when the edition was to come out, we weren't in it. And after making a phone call to Reader's Digest in London, the people said, oh, we're so sorry. We didn't realize that we had not included you in the print run. But we'll make it up to you. For the same money, we'll give you a blanket the entire British Isles. So you'll get 10 times your result for your money. That's what it came out to be. We need those kind of breaks. I imagine in the future we're going to need God's intervention time and time again. Do we have the faith to expect it, to be confident? Or is it going to be a nail-biting thing? Oh, I sure hope we do the right thing, and I hope we do enough of it. It's amazing what God has done. And sometimes God will maybe withhold something, and then the blessing appears, just so we don't take anything for granted. That we remember what God said to Gideon, we got to work this out so that people don't take credit for something that I did. That we need to make a distinction that more people died from the hailstones than from whatever the Israelites did on the ground. I can remember a Feast of Tabernacles. It was 1981. We were in Prestatyn, and I think John Johnson, who gave the sermonette, was there. Anyway, it was an exciting time because this would be when the British Isles would be hooked up during the Feast of Tabernacles for, I think, an opening day message, yes, with the people, the British peoples and the people of Prestatyn, Wales, and anywhere else in Europe would have the opportunity to be on a satellite hookup with Pasadena. And Pasadena was, of course, the home office of the church back then. And so it was not only to be a special treat to be able to hear this, but it would be in living color. So when it was 9 o'clock at night that we would gather, and that would mean it was like 10 o'clock in the morning in Pasadena. Anyway, something like that. So they hired 3 outside technicians to manage this hookup. They had machinery bigger than this podium and 1 million wires, or so it seemed. And it looked like a very intimidating project. Well, it was T-minus 60 seconds to go. Everything's hooked up, 30 seconds to go. And they're ready to launch this thing. And the guy hits the switch, and poof, there was an explosion at the podium and smoke going everywhere. And you saw the technicians running around like mad hornets trying to fix the equipment. It was fried. But they thought, well, maybe we can salvage it. So after sitting there for 3 minutes, the audience was notified in an announcement, we're sorry, we're having technical difficulties. We don't believe that we'll ever see it in color, but maybe in black and white if we pray. And then a few minutes later, there was another explosion in the podium, and it looked really bad. And one of the technicians, wasn't a church member, one of the technicians said, quote, "We're doomed. Not even Superman could help us now." Instantly, there was a perfect picture that came. And Art Gilmore's voice, "Welcome to Ambassador College." And I still get worked up over that. I just thought that was the most exciting thing. I was glad it happened. I was glad that God decided to manifest just a tiny fraction of his power to make a statement that he is our God, and he is our partner, and he is the one that supports us and guides us and utilizes us, even against all odds, to be able to accomplish some wonderful things. There was a time in the 1940s when Mr. Armstrong was on radio. It was the primary way that we could reach people. And with one of the most prestigious stations with 50,000 watts of power that could be heard coast to coast back then was WHO in Des Moines, Iowa. Mr. Armstrong was traveling all over the country. He was pretty busy, and he was really tired. He got to Des Moines, and he was required to give a live broadcast every so many months. And so he did it. He gave it his best, but he just didn't feel like he had it. But sometimes when you were tired, you have to keep doing it anyway. And so it was that he plowed through it. And when he was done, he thought, oh, it's over. But when he was done, the manager came out and said, "Mr. Armstrong, that was not a very good effort that you gave." He said, you know, you usually do a lot better. And then he went on to say, you know, WHO is a prestigious station. You know, we have a certain minimum that we try to aspire to. And he wrote in his autobiography, he says, I only knew too well that he was correct. But what he lacked, God made up for it on that evening, because it was a cold day in January. And when it is exceptionally cold, the radio waves really electrify and bounce off of the ionosphere. And they had a record number of responses. Normally it would average 200 per Sunday evening. They got 2,000 requests. It was by far and away the biggest response to anything they had done on radio. But that's because he had confidence in a partner that could do what he himself could not do. Have you ever been in that situation? Of course you have. Have some of you been in ICU just like the person we heard about here? Of course. And sometimes when the rubber meets the road, it's just you and God, you have to ask for God's help. And you have to expect it. As it says in Hebrews 11, verse 6, I'll turn over there. You can turn if you wish. Says, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. The key is, do we diligently seek him? Did Joshua, did Gideon diligently seek God? All these people that are mentioned in Hebrews 11 certainly did. If we go back to the beginning, verse 1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And there are examples, modern day as well as biblical examples. Verse 2, for by it the elders obtained a good testimony. Verse 3, by faith we understand that worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. Then we go on, verse 5, and by faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death at that point. Verse 6 we've read. Verse 7, by faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, and prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness, which is according to faith. You know, Noah had to act before there was any indication that there would be a flood. It probably looked absolutely ridiculous to the people that knew him to see this gigantic boat being constructed, maybe even half finished at that point, and they're thinking, why doesn't he give up? You know, after 20 years, I think I would find something else to do. Maybe there were people that worked on the ark. Maybe they were hired. One saying to another, so how long have you worked on the ark? Oh, about 5 years. You know, the way I figure, if I can put in 10 years, I'll get a retirement maybe, and I can go on and do something else. So people could look at it in different ways and not realize exactly that they had their hands on the one vessel that would save human life. But with God's help, we can discern that which is right. We can discern where God is working and where he is not, and God can make a difference. If you think back to Abraham when he was talking to God prior to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a great concern that even though Abraham knew he had been blessed, how on earth was his genealogy to be extended after he died? They had no son. As it turned out, in Genesis 18 and verse 14, when Abraham was talking about what would happen to Sodom and Gomorrah, in Genesis 18 and verse 14, was an interesting exchange of words in the conversation. That verse 13 let's start there. Why did Sarah laugh? God said, saying, shall I surely bear a child since I'm old? Well, she was only 90. And so she was told that she would have a child a year later. And notice verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? We have to remind ourselves. Sometimes we are just very much caught up in the here and now, in driving and fighting traffic and working with chores and house renovation and working hours on end. Excuse me. So anyway, it's amazing that God is willing to be patient with us and work with us. And again, the question arose, and it's still in front of us today. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? And the answer is no. And I won't turn there, but if you go to Psalm 78, you read about a history of the Israelites, especially coming out of Egypt, and all the different snags they hit, where they showed utter lack of faith in God, a vote of no confidence with all their griping and disorientation. And so it was a disappointment. And obviously, they did not make it into the promised land. They didn't have the faith that they needed. I saved 2 people. But it's important for us to understand that God is willing to be there for those that He can help. And He wants us to endure to the end. He wants us to have the enthusiasm that we need to care about the things the way He does. As it turned out, Sarah did have a son. It makes me remember when I was in the congregation up in New Hampshire years ago, I remember listening to 2 women talking, and one said, and I don't understand why I never had a child. And it was something we really wanted. And God had His reasons, I would imagine. But the next time I saw her, she had 5 sons. And she was no longer distraught. If you read about Hannah, you read about Mary and Elizabeth, other people have gone through those unusual experiences. And then others never had those experiences, but they had others. And it might have been, well, if I told somebody, the person wouldn't believe me. Because there's no understanding or accommodation for faith in that person. Anyway, it's important for us to realize just how powerful God is and what He can do. And it can be humbling. One other example that happened, I was an eyewitness to it because I was right in the middle of it. We were working on the watch line one night, Sunday night. This is back years ago. And I think most people were in the church then, but if you weren't, we had a television program every Sunday, and there was always literature that would be offered. And so I was working the watch line then with a number of people. It was a busy day. I had taken like 600 phone requests. I was writing as fast as I possibly could for hour after hour after hour. So my arm was dead. And it was time to go home. I was the last person out. So I was turning off all the lights, shutting things down. And then the campus phone rang. And I thought, nobody works past 11:30 on Sunday evening. I'm not going to answer that. No, I better answer it. And the person on the other side of the phone was in a panic. Oh, you can't leave. You can't leave. And I said, why can't I leave? Well, we didn't realize that Channel 11 is airing tonight, and it's going to be on in the next few seconds. You got to stay and just gather as many names and addresses as you can. Okay. So I turn the lights all back on, and I'm poised, and I'm sitting there with the stack of cards and my pen, and I'm trying to get psyched up because I know what's going to happen. We had normally 25 people to answer those phones, and you'd answer 4 or 5 requests in a row. And this was Los Angeles, KHJ. It covered LA, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Nevada, and other places. And Mr. Ted Armstrong is there, and he says, and now you need to get this free booklet. It's the best thing. It's really fantastic, and so forth. Operators, plural, are standing by. No, they're not. And I'm watching the TV monitor on the shelf, and then bring all these and phones light up. I pick up the phone. Ted Armstrong, can you hold, please? Ted Armstrong program, can you hold? You want the booklet? Hold. Hold. Okay, name and address. And I'm just going and going. I'm exhausted. Then there's a little bit of a lull. And then there's the second advertisement. And by the way, when you get that first booklet, you need the sister companion and this and that. No, and then bring, they all write, and I'm writing. And then 10 minutes later, the conclusion. They always offer everything at the end. Oh, and so there I go, writing as quickly as I can. And I hope I wasn't rude, but I was flying, and my arm was half dead. I couldn't make the letters look legible. So I'll recopy later. Anyway, after that, the phones kept going, and they had so many busy outs where the phone wasn't answered. It was hundreds and hundreds anyway. And so finally, an hour after all this started, I'm really dead. And I'm going to turn the lights off, and the phone rings, the campus phone, that made my life very, very complicated. And nobody could get on the campus phone. You had to be except for if you were on campus or in a dorm. But you couldn't call the campus phone from the outside. But that happened this night. So I reach over, I says, hello, and I'm expecting a student or somebody, how did it go? And this guy on the other end is really upset. He says, confounded, what's wrong with you people? Don't you answer your phones? And he said, I've been trying. You know what? You're no better than the University of Southern California. Last week, I tried to donate $500,000 to their causes, and guess what? They didn't answer their phones either. So I'm done with them, and I'm almost done with you, but the guy seemed level-headed tonight, and so forth, and I'll give you $500,000. If somebody will have the decency to contact me. I said, hold it. We can talk. Just wait a minute. I said, I'll take this to the Hall of Ad building tomorrow at 8 a.m. when they open up, and I'll take this to somebody that will call you. And that's what happened. You don't know sometimes what's around the corner. You don't know God's imagination. I know I don't. And anything is possible with God. Luke 1, verse 37. With God, all things are possible. Matthew 19, verse 26. With God, all things are possible. So if we don't have the money for something we really need, if we don't have the personnel, as Mr. Shaby has said, I've heard him say it in different times, God will provide. And that's true. This is not a work of men. It's a work of God. And fortunately, it's that way. Fortunately. Let's move on to the second area. We've just looked at the value of remembering divine intervention of God. The second point is having a profound respect for godly authority. Authority is a bad word in the minds of many people. It's like that snake flag that one of the colonies had in the Revolutionary War with the letters underneath, "Don't tread on me, I am my own person." It's hard to come out of a society like that and think, well, you know what? I need to depend on God. I need to have Him as my leader. But you and I cannot have faith if we don't have respect and authority. Because if we have faith, we're looking to, in this case, godly authority to make things happen and for us to submit to it. It's hard. So often you see in this, I'd rather be in a democracy, first of all, than living under a dictatorship. But democracy is a terrible eroder of faith. I don't know if you've ever thought of that. But with democracies, we have appeals. Oh, I don't like what that guy said. I'm going to take it up to the next level. Oh, I didn't get what I wanted there. I'm going to take it to the top. I'll take it to the Supreme Court if they'll let me. And I believe in this, and that's semifinal. This is the way society seems to operate. And so people don't understand that if you don't have authority, that's the glue that holds things together. In the military, there definitely is authority. Maybe it's abused. I think we all would hate the abuse of authority. And if we've ever been the recipient of something like that, we bristle. That's understandable. But when we can see the hand of God, if we have the spiritual discernment to see where He's working, to see that He has included us, then we can have more of a respect for godly authority. And this is what happened with the centurion. And let's turn over to Matthew chapter 8. Christ was incredibly impressed with what we'll read here. And it takes a lot to impress God or Christ. I mean, they can be excited that they created a fantastic universe, that people like David could look up into the heavens and muse and say, God is such a master creator. But in Matthew chapter 8, what really got Christ's attention was the example that we read about. I'll get there in a minute. Matthew chapter 8. I'm at home. All right. Verse 7. Verse 6, rather. There's a centurion that said, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed, dreadfully tormented. I don't know what that means, dreadfully tormented. I'm in the New King James, but it sounds pretty horrible. And Jesus said, I will come and heal him. Christ was used to being requested to come, and so, yes, I'll take care of it. And the centurion shocked the socks off of him with the following response. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but just speak the word and my servant will be healed. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. I say to this one, you go, and he goes. Another, come, and he comes. And to my servant, do this, and he does it. I don't have to think twice. If I told him once, it's going to happen. Because the deal is, in the Roman army, if you don't follow your order, you're put to death. And when Jesus heard this, he marveled. And he said to those that were there, assuredly I say to you that I have not found such great faith, not in Israel. You see, the centurion only had to be told once, I'll come and heal your daughter. No, just give the word. All right, I'll just give the word. That's it. Done deal. And he just knew that his daughter would be healed because he recognized the authority of Jesus Christ. Well, we recognize the authority of Jesus Christ. So that should give us great confidence that when we come before the throne of grace, we can come, as it says, boldly. We can expect an answer. When we're in harmony with God, why wouldn't He answer us? He may answer us immediately. That takes our breath away at times, but He could delay it. But if He says He'll do it, He can do it. And if we read in John chapter 14, we have the opportunity to use the power of attorney. That is only respected when there is respect for authority. And so in chapter 10, for example, there was a chapter 10 of Acts 10, verse 2. Verse 1, let's start there. Acts 10, verse 1. There was a certain man in Caesarea called Cornelius, a centurion of what was called the Italian regiment, a devout man, and one who feared God with his household, who gave alms generously to the people and prayed to God always. A man with unbelievable credential as a servant, and he was a Roman soldier. And then he met up with, eventually he had a vision where he was going to meet up with a representative of God, and he had the dream that you're familiar with. But he ended up coming down to meet Peter. And verse 21, Peter went down with the men who had been sent to him from Cornelius and said, "Yes, I am the one that you should seek. For what reason have you come?" And they said, "Cornelius, a centurion, a just man, one who fears God and has a good reputation among the nation of the Jews, was divinely instructed by a holy angel to summon you to his house and to hear the words from you." Even though he was a man in authority, he recognized a greater authority, God. And so he was wanting to talk to God's representatives, which became even more faith-building and made quite the impression. And when all was said and done, he was converted. He received God's Spirit directly, and his family was blessed as well. And that was because he understood authority. He had respect for that. We have so little respect for authority in this world. You don't see it in the classroom. You don't even see it with the police. Let's defund the police. Let's have anarchy. That's the mindset of people in some of the large cities. We have some cities where the death toll by random shootings continues to climb. Places like Chicago might have 80 killings in one weekend. It's chaos. It's a world that's becoming increasingly dangerous to live because there is no authority, no glue to hold things together. And so that rubs off on people, and it can't rub off on us. Unfortunately, it has. When you see division, every division is a vote of no confidence in the prior status quo. If everybody, even within the church, had a profound respect for authority and godly authority, you would not have 300 different churches of God. You wouldn't have all this fragmentation. Who is going to make it to the finish line? It's not the most knowledgeable necessarily. It is not the fastest person on foot. It's going to be the people that understand where the hand of God is and are close enough to follow God's lead and to respect higher human authority. It's amazing how many people can't accept higher human authority, and yet we're always going to be under authority, and we'll be under God's authority. That's where faith building comes in. Think of King David before he was king, and Saul was chasing him, trying to kill him. It's no fair. God, you can't let that happen. It looked like it was going to happen. And David was running for his life. And in 1 Samuel 24 and 1 Samuel 26, on two different occasions, he almost was caught by Saul and his crackerjack army of 3,000 people. It's like taking 3,000 Navy SEALs and chasing this little flea in the wilderness. David could have put Saul to death, could have chained him up and then said, "Look, all of you 3,000, you follow me. We're taking over." No. Promotion doesn't come from the east or the west or the south, but it comes from the north, where we've wondered if God's throne is located. And if we follow the lead of God, we're not going to lift up our hand. We're going to trust God to do it. And David did not lift up his hand against God's anointed. I've known of other people that probably wouldn't hesitate. Well, must be God's will. We have to be careful before we assign things to be what God's will is or is not. And so David did not do that. And God had fulfilled his promises, and David was king, but it was later. It was later. God will sometimes answer our prayers in ways that we don't even imagine, in ways that are circuitous, and yet it makes sense looking back. You could say, "Oh yeah, David, he didn't lift up his hand against Saul." But if you were there at the time, like one of his assistants, "David, hey, just do it. And if you don't want to do it, I'll do it. And I won't have to try twice either." There is a way that seemeth right, ways that end in death. There are other ways that are circuitous. They take longer, and they work out. And then sometimes God will intervene immediately. His ways are past finding out. We walk by faith and not by sight. When I first came into the church, that was my least favorite verse in the Bible, because I wanted to have my ducks in a row, wanted to know what's coming over the horizon, wanted just the opposite. And God says, no, you are going to have to walk the same trail that everybody else does, where some things may make perfect sense, other things you may not know the answer to, but eventually it becomes obvious. Leads me to my next, last point, and that is we need to understand that Satan has a plan for us, just as God does. Satan has a plan for us. And if you look at the autobiography of Mr. Armstrong, which to me is a fascinating work, it's not the Bible, but it does illustrate numerous biblical lessons, and it talks about the things that Mr. Armstrong had to deal with, and many of those we have to deal with. And it doesn't really matter where in the book, either volume 1 or volume 2 you go, there were always problems and challenges. But every challenge became a faith builder. When he wanted to establish a college, he knew he needed to, because he had to have a trained ministry. When he started up churches, he could in Denver and in Los Angeles and Eugene and other places, he couldn't be everywhere. And when he could not get to a place, the group just fizzled away. So he needed trained ministries. And it took time. And he felt that he needed a college to make that happen. Wouldn't you know that there was one adversity after another fighting against him? They couldn't open the college on time because it was too late in the semester. 40 people applied that first year, only 4 were around to be accepted. He was reduced to having a faculty of 8 people, and then they were going to be working part-time. And was there ever going to be enough money to just pay the handful of teachers that he had? It was tough. And so many people went out of their way to come up to him and say, when this thing folds up, when this folds up. It looked like he had a great piece of property to start the college, a couple of acres of land, and it was obvious that the one building could be the library. The horse stables could be converted to have dorms on the second level, and a place to store and print literature. And yet it would be tight, not enough room. And when he was ready to launch the college, he had to pass several inspections. The person that sold it to him guaranteed this is a solid built building. And when they drilled in to check it out after the purchase, no, it wasn't. It was a frame house, and there was rotting wood, and it all had to be replaced. And back in 1947, that was going to cost like $20,000. They had maybe $2,000 every week that came in for income. And that was spoken for before they could do anything else. So it looked bad. Then, on top of that, when they got in and looked at the interior of the building, they realized it had to be rewired. And so the city of Pasadena condemned it to death. And then on top of wiring, there's some other serious problems. It was a fire hazard. Fire department condemned it. Might have been better to just bulldoze the thing down. That's what he started with. It seemed time dated. He had to get something. He was spinning his wheels. He needed a ministry. And it started out in such a humble way. Different people he didn't ever meet pledged money in case they would be able to have it. And as it turned out, eventually, the college did get up off the ground. The earliest students, and he didn't know this till later, he felt terrible. Dr. Hay was one, and he was showing some of the other students what wild weeds that grew along the railroad track you could eat in order to supplement whatever it was they ate when they had meals together. So this is not to be just a tale of woe. It's just that most people wouldn't plow through against these kind of odds. And yet God gave them what they needed They never went without. And that's how the work was built. It was built on faith. I think that a lot of the answers to our challenges of the future are explained in some of the material that we've looked at today. It's important to understand that history has a way of repeating itself, because God says, okay, here are different people, but they need the same indoctrination, they need the same inspiration, the same discernment. They need to know where we're going as best as they can, and to follow God's lead, and to see the hand of God in the picture so that one can respect the authority of God as God acts. To me, that's absolutely vital. And occasionally there are those positive examples of excitement. But it says in 1 Peter 5 and verse 8, and you're familiar with this, I'm sure. 1 Peter 5 and verse 8. Okay. Be sober and be vigilant. Be alert, not asleep at the switch, because your adversary, and we have an adversary, just like Mr. Armstrong did, just like David did, and Abraham, and you name any of the people that are mentioned in Hebrews 11 or elsewhere in the Bible, because your adversary, the devil, our adversary, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him. Stand fast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brethren in the world. And so we strive to resist. At the youth camps this summer, that was the theme, stand strong. And a lot of the Bible studies at the camp meetings were underscoring that, to be strong in the faith and putting on the whole armor of God. Satan does not want any of us to succeed. The good news is God is not just 1,000,000 times stronger than Satan, 1,000,000,000 times stronger. He is infinitely stronger. And Satan cannot stand in the presence of God's Spirit. And if we're close to God, he resists us. He doesn't want to be around us. So if we find ourselves succumbing to wrong pulls and wrong circumstances, it may be that we're not developing or renewing our faith, which would be a daily experience. Boldly coming before God and knowing and believing that God is, and he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. So I am a marvel at when you go through adversity and then you see the miracle of God, it is breathtaking. It's breathtaking even now to look back at Ambassador College in Pasadena to see the miracles that happened. I talked about the building that became the library that was condemned, but it was finally restored in pristine condition. And as the college expanded, there were other different victories along the way where they needed space at the college and they got it. A piece of property would fall in their lap for a fraction of what it originally cost. Manor Del Mar, Mayfair building was one, among them. But the one that took the cake was where Hewlett C. Merritt, who was a millionaire even a century ago, whose family owned a lot of the Mesabi iron ore range in Minnesota, he had this huge mansion in Pasadena. If some of you, some of you probably are old enough to remember the TV program Millionaire, and that was filmed on the majestic property as this man goes up to the top of the steps to hand an envelope to the resident. Anyway, that was an expensive building. The mahogany and the other woods in there were worth, back in 1903, $1.5 million. In today's money, if you could even find that wood, it would be at least 100 times more valuable. So we're looking at, in today's standards, a $100 million property, several acres, the Italian fountains, and this one gorgeous portico. All of that was going up for bid when Hewlett Merritt died, and many of his relatives did. And they didn't, anyway, when Mr. Armstrong was notified of it, he says, told it was Rod Meredith and Dr. Hay, see if you can get, we need to act on this maybe. So see if you can take a look at it tonight. So they went and got in the building somehow, and in the dark they saw, yeah, there's enough here. We can't see the detail, but there are enough classrooms and so forth. So they reported back, and Mr. Armstrong was in England at the time. And so the decision, go ahead. And so, to make a long story short, the church made a bid for $11,000. And why did they offer that? Because that's all they had. And they didn't even think of a building like that. But God did, apparently. I mean, the way it unfolded. And so it was estimated that the fence that went around this 2.5 acres was worth more than $11,000 in that back then. And all these other people thought, it's so far out of reach. I don't have the millions. I can't possibly dive into this. And so we had the winning bid, $11,000. And people threw a fit. Why, if we only knew? We would have done, let's do it all over again. Let's have another sealed bid auction. Too late. But I won't take the time. They barely got in because of some hiccups along the way. But that property became a jewel. Before he died, Mr. Merritt noticed that Mr. Armstrong was picking up one property after another for this expanding campus. He said, Mr. Armstrong, you're the biggest small-time operator I know. It wasn't him. It was God. And it won't be any human being. If we do what God wants us to do before Christ gets here, it'll be God that did it. And if we get out of the way and allow him to work through us, then guess what? We're going to be successful. And everybody will know that, yes, when Christ comes back to the earth, there is faith. There's faith with you and me and whoever wants to believe that God is not a God of love. He's a God of authority. He's a God of getting things done. So we've looked today at the need for remembering the divine interventions of God for his people. And he's encouraged when we start to care about the work the way he does, when we care about the people that are doing the work the way he does. Secondly, having a profound respect for godly authority. Thirdly, understanding that Satan, who was buffeting and fighting against Mr. Armstrong, he wants us to fail. But we don't have to worry about it if we pledge ourselves to be close to God, because then we can achieve the kind of results that God wants. So having and developing faith can be an encouraging process that can really change the course of history. And we are on the ground floor of a pretty important work that exceeds all other activity that we can imagine. We're in an election year cycle, and there are a lot of people worked up over that. One day, those people are going to say, we were in a sandbox just spinning our wheels when there was a fantastic work going on that's far more important than what we thought was extremely important. And we're going to be able to inspire these people to give up the society today for the world tomorrow. Let's be glad that we understand these things, that there is rhyme and reason to our challenges, even the health trials that we go through, because how we finish the race from this time forward, and it's not a long ways to go, is going to make a big difference for our lives. We can be among the faithful, and God can be the willing to reward all of us.